How many of you ride a bike? How about drive a car or a truck? For work, maybe? How about use a crane? Of course, it's Quartz Lab. Ravi, he's got one. My name is Drew. I'm a professional balloon artist, and this is my crane. It's what we had to use on the last project I did. Next couple of minutes, I'm going to cover the three main things that made it possible to build a giant balloon spaceship that was roughly 65 feet tall, and some of the challenges we had in order to make it possible. This is the BBV Compass Stadium in Houston, and myself, along with the Airigami team, were asked to build a full-size replica space shuttle in front of it. It had to be 60 feet tall. And that's quite large when it comes to balloons. They had to be self-standing as best they could, except for the crane supporting it. And we had a limited amount of time to put it together. So first of all, how tall is 60 feet? It's hard to imagine this when you think of a balloon. 60 feet is obviously a 6-story building. It's also a standard articulating bus, like the ones we see in Toronto. You stack it end to end, you have roughly a 60-foot long structure. It's also the same size as a fin whale. The little scuba diver there is basically to scale. And of course, it's also the same as a whole pile of balloons, roughly 45 of these, filled up to about that much end to end. Here, catch this for me, would you? Always hits the guy in the front. The main thing we had to do was to be organized, and there's just so much that we had to get done. We had about 55 pages, 58 pages of blueprints. Larry and Kelly, the leaders of Airigami, spent 4 months getting this project plan together. We met daily, about 7:30, 8 o'clock every morning before our volunteers came in. We had piles and piles of equipment, 5 or 6 compressors, 12 large-scale hand pumps, a skid full of balloons, hoses that stretched forever. There's a lot of equipment when you're doing a big build like this, and of course everything's got to be set up. You've got to tape everything down and make sure your volunteers are safe, make sure your compressors are working properly. And every morning, we'd get a new crop of volunteers, and usually after lunch, we'd get another set of volunteers. So the volunteers would come in, and Larry would give them a talk. We'd go through what the sections were that we were building. We'd all be assigned our individual pieces on the blueprints, and we'd start building. It took 300 volunteers over the course of about 4 days to put this together. There were 11 artists. 8 of us were there full-time, and we had a few others that were able to come in on a day-by-day basis. We split the section up that we were working in into 3 main groups. We had, on the far end, we had the outer booster tanks. The section here in the center where the white pieces are, that's where the main fuselage was. That's where I spent most of my time. And then, of course, behind me, we had the main fuel tank being built. And it was right about this point when we put the first section of the fuel tank together that we realized how colossally huge this thing was going to be. This is a lot of balloons. This is a big, big project. That fuel tank section, once we put in a panel on the inside to keep it stable, is actually 10 feet in diameter. It's big. And as the project goes on, we start getting into clouds because we have to have our nice, we want the rocket taking off, we want to have clouds along the bottom sort of spread out and looking nice. And when you start realizing that the clouds are getting bigger than you are, you start realizing what 30,000 balloons actually looks like. This here is Lisa. Lisa is standing at both ends of the project in one magical shot. And you can see her way far at the other end. She's sort of pointing out the nose cone of the fuel tank. Lisa is not 4'2". She's around 5'10", I believe. This is a large project with a lot of puzzle pieces that we have to get together. And obviously, to stay organized, we're going to have to mark these things so that we can put them up properly, because all of these pieces have to be transported to the Compass Stadium and assembled. So we do obvious things, of course, this end up, fairly straightforward. But we also came up with a color coordinating system so that each piece we would know which way it would line up. We couldn't even reverse them. If we reversed the pieces, they were not going to fit together properly. So we had every piece labeled, so it was fairly straightforward. You put the red balloon to the red balloon, knot them together, get rid of the red balloon, and you're all lined up. And this made life a lot easier for the volunteers as well, because when we're transporting them out there, the 11 of us that are there leading, we can't be with every piece. We have to be in strategic places. Houston's hot. It's July. It's hot. It's hot, hot, hot. Especially for the Canadian that just wanted to turn into a melted puddle of goo. Apparently, the temperature that day was 36 degrees Celsius with a beautiful humidex of 46 and a UV index of above 11. And the locals would just look at us and say, oh, it's actually kind of nice for this time of year. It's not so bad. So we have to prepare for that, and this is Richard here. He's spraying down one of the fuel tank sections with a silicone mixture. Every balloon was sprayed with silicone and then hand polished to basically act like a sunscreen to help give us a little bit more time in the sun. It took 6 gallons of the mixture in the end to get every piece polished. And the day before we did one final test, we just grabbed some random balloons. We've got some blacks, some browns, a couple different shapes. And we thought, okay, let's just double check and make sure the silicone mixture is working. There had been tests done earlier in the project to make sure it was going to work. And, of course, what happens, but we lost half of them within the hour, and that caused a nice bit of panic because this was not expected. One of the weird things about balloons is that you would have thought intuitively, well, maybe the black ones are going to burst first because they're darker, they'll absorb more light. And we actually lost all the lighter colors first. It seems to have more to do with the thickness of the balloon and the inks that are used than the color itself. The dyes themselves obviously have some level of chemistry when it comes to the sun rays. Balloons decompose naturally. The sun just speeds it up. So anything we could do to slow it down was really necessary, and what we felt the best option was when we were moving everything, we were going to set it up so that in our parade, we'd make sure people could stop in shady spaces. And so the balloons, as they left the one building to get to the other, would never be stuck waiting somewhere in the sun before they needed to go up. And that actually did help us a fair bit. We also had to set up our rigging. There's a lot of balloons here to keep up, and when you're making something this big, it's like a giant sail. It's got to be secure for wind. It's got to be secure for its own weight. It worked out to 285 pounds of mass with the balloons, the air inside, and the silicone on top of that. And, of course, the whole time we're learning, and it's supposed to be a fun event, and it really is a lot of fun. Doing a project of this scale in another location is just a blast because you get to meet all these wonderful people that have different experiences. And let's face it, we're playing with balloons. I mean, it really is a lot of fun. We had teams coming in that were excellent at working together and producing items. A lot of what we do is very repetitious. We're coming up with textures and a pattern that's going to look really nice. These two worked really hard to come up with a wing design. And, of course, once we get big enough, we can start making things like clouds and playing with them. I believe every volunteer on the 3rd day we were there had a bubble bath, something similar to that. So there's one of our patterns. There's a wing design right there. This group was just awesome. I think they popped out 3 wing patterns with me over the course of an afternoon, and just a blast to work with. And, of course, we have a lot of equipment, new equipment. We came up with our own inflatonators, as they're called. Dr. Doofenshmirtz retweeted that we had inflatonators. Larry came up with these using Arduinos as the main computer source for this, because there really wasn't anything else that we could use to get our balloons to be the same size every time. And, of course, logically, if you have an inflatonator, you have to have a deflatonator, which is probably the most vicious balloon instrument I have ever seen. It's a large pile of pins stuck to a wand. Pat came up with this, another team member. Logically, when you have a deflatonator that's incredibly dangerous, the very first thing you do is you balance it on your nose as an entertainer. I actually think this is the most dangerous thing I've seen balanced on someone's nose because, well, it's sharp and pointy. Final day comes, and we have to get our pieces transported. There's our nose cone coming out, the first crew. The one big, you can see how wide that 10-foot section is. The nose cones of the fuel tanks are coming out. And we are proceeding roughly about 1 kilometer to the stadium. Right about now, it's really quite interesting because all the pieces are there. We want to see how it's going to come together. Everyone has to be part of this walk. We got to watch when you're transporting something this big that we're not bumping into trees, that we're not bumping into other objects. There's the color coordinating. You can see some of the individual colors put out on the fuel tank pieces, so we know that they line up properly. And of course, sometimes you have to transport things any way that it actually works. This is Texas, so apparently this was a completely normal site, just having a big cloud on top of a van. We did have a police escort to help us get through the traffic. We had a couple major spots that it was a good idea to have a little extra safety involved. And here we are where the crane is, waiting. We've got our water tank set up. It was hot. Oh my. I went through 6 liters of water on that day. We had a crane operator who was really awesome in keeping out for us, and basically every now and would say, hey, you need to drink another bottle of water. I'm not having anyone pass out, and I really appreciate him for that. Typical day when I'm twisting in Canada, just earlier this morning when I was out twisting, 2 liters of water, no problem for the day, and I'm good. Here, 6 liters, and I was still thirsty. Like I just kept drinking water even right back into the hotel room. As we're assembling, we're obviously trying to stay very cautious. We have to bring each piece in, and you're twisting up high. And it took us about 4 hours to assemble this. I still have a blister left over from all the knotting that we did. And of course, you're sort of wedged into the balloon sometimes as you're twisting each piece on. And it takes a lot of volunteers because we have to keep this thing stable. It's a very large structure. Your shoulders, of course, are getting kind of sore because most of the work you're doing are up high. You can see here Todd's actually reaching up for one of the guidelines that's going through the balloon. In the background, we've got Richard working one of the winch elements to lift everything up. And when you're building something like this, you're essentially building a giant sail. We are outside. It is windy. Well, not really windy, a little gusty. And you have to have people with guidelines able to keep that structure safe and not blow away. It's amazing how much of a sail the structure turns into as the day goes on. But it comes together, and it gets really exciting when you get to these last pieces. You're like, oh my gosh, we're finally there. All this work, it's been a week of work and all these months of planning, and we're getting the rocket boosters put together, and the volunteers, even after standing outside, you can see it's starting to get a little bit darker now. We've been out there for many hours, and they're still enthusiastic. They're still saying, wow, this is amazing. We're building something incredible and big and cool and wonderful. And finally, we have liftoff. It's 285 pounds of balloons shooting off into the sky. I absolutely love this photo. It's just so colorful, and it's explosive. It's one of my favorite shots from the whole build. The opening ceremonies for the event happened, of course. We've got fireworks there. We've got our big space shuttle set up, taking off into the night sky. It ended up being 65 feet tall, which is really good. I did a measurement right before it went up. I measured each piece out to see how it worked out, and it looked like it was about plus or minus 6 inches to a 1/3 scale. So I'm really very excited that with all the challenges with the heat and the humidity and the long hours, we were still able to get that level of consistency. And one element remains really clear to me from this whole thing, and I mean, there were a lot of people. This is one of the group shots from, I believe, day 2. They were so organized, and we had so much fun that I believe very strongly that when you can persevere and push it through with a group like this, you really can produce anything that you want to, and it can be totally worth it. The final image is often spectacular. Thank you.